G'day, it's Robbie Regain. Well, one of the benefits of doing YouTube and actually looking at YouTube is that you get to read the comments. You get a lot of comments, and you know, you can learn a lot of stuff from those comments. And if it's a channel where there's a lot of feedback from the creator and the people that watch, quite often you can get some good ideas come floating through, and you can broaden your knowledge beyond what is in the actual video itself. Some of the things that you do, you just take for granted. You don't think that people, you don't even think about whether people know it or not. You just, it's so sort of obvious, you think, well, it doesn't even cross your mind, basically. And it's not until you get feedback from comments that, well, you give feedback and then get feedback back, that you realise that, yeah, well, maybe everybody doesn't know about that particular trick, you know, maybe it's worth a video. So anyway, that's what happened to me recently. I responded to a video that Alan from Retro Steam Tech did on, you know, don't throw stuff out, repurpose stuff. And one of the things he mentioned was, you know, repurposing thread taps, and he gave the example of, you know, what you could do with it, and I thought, oh yeah, okay, but I mean, there's something you could do with them that is basically not covered there that maybe Alan would like to know about. So I informed Alan, and he got back and said, oh yeah, well, that's a good idea. Wouldn't have thought of that. And that's the whole thing. You quite often, you can't see the tree for the forest, you know. It's that sort of situation. You break a thread tap, and you know, A, it's generally going to happen in the worst spot, and B, it's going to be right at the end of the job you're making, and C, you're going to have a hell of a job trying to get it out, and D, you could even destroy all that handiwork you've done and mess up the finish. So breaking a thread tap is a bad situation. That's why I hate, and I never do, use power tapping, you know, on the lathe or with a drill or anything. I've just seen too many drills break, too many taps break, too many heartaches and headaches that come out of broken taps, and I just won't do it. I just do it all by feel. Do it by hand, yep. Even in the lathe, I turn it over by hand, and you can feel exactly what you're doing. So first off, we'll look at the type of taps that you get, and basically taps come in three forms. The actual terminology may vary a bit over the planet. In Australia, we call them starting taps, intermediate taps, finishing taps. But other countries might call them taper taps, plug taps, and bottoming taps, the same three. So we'll talk Aussie talk here, so we're talking starting, intermediate, and finishing. Whenever you buy a set of taps, like this for instance, you generally get intermediate taps. If you look at that and look at the taps, you can see the profile on them is basically intermediate. A starting tap is easier to use because you don't have to ram it in so hard. You can just, it'll feed itself in. So starting taps are good, but then you lose a lot of length in the tap itself. So you nearly always get intermediate taps, and if you go and buy replacement taps, I always anyway tend to buy intermediates, because intermediates will do the job. You might have to push a bit harder to actually get them in, but well, you know, even intermediates, the amount of taper will vary quite a bit. This one doesn't actually have much at all. Some will have damn near as much as a starting tap. So, you know, it depends who makes them and the grind on them. But the problem is when you break one. Okay, a lot of people just throw the taps away. You know, they break them off. And once again, there's several sorts of taps and processes that they use to make them, as far as being easy or hard to get out when they break. If the tap's going to break, a tap like that is going to break, it will snap off right on the surface. And once again, you're going to have a hell of a job trying to get it out. So you're left with half a tap probably, you know. And then you can get taps from some brands that actually have a break section built into them, like this one. These taps are Australian taps, and these are a brand that has a break-off point in them, so they're designed to actually snap off here at this weaker point, weaker section. So if it does, say, get halfway in and then jam, rather than snap off flush here, or snap off here, and you get some gripping pliers on there and you can unscrew it and get the stubby bit out. But of course the tap is totally ruined in that situation. These are not reusable. You can't repurpose these, not unless you use the high-speed steel for something totally different. So we'll rule these out of the equation. So we're talking about this sort of tap. Now this sort of tap, and we'll look at intermediate and these two, which is what you're going to have basically in most situations. If you snap it off, it'll snap off flush with the surface in both cases. So you're left with half a tap, and people will just throw them away. It'll be all jagged on the end and you know, torn up, and people just throw them out. That's what they do. But actual fact, they're still usable, because while they may not have a sufficient length to be a good starting tap, or even an intermediate tap, if you grind them off flush, just that broken bit, you know, so it's all jagged and stuffed up, just grind it back flush, you can turn it into a finishing tap or a bottoming tap. So here's an example of a complete tap, and one that's been broken off at this point here, and it's been reground into a finishing tap, a bottoming tap. In Australia, a lot of people call them plug taps, because basically they're very, very similar. What we do is grind them off flush, put a shallow relief on them to make them a plug tap, or no relief at all if you want it to be a bottoming tap. But either way, you've turned one of these, which was snapped off and stuffed, into one of these, which is now going to be super useful. You can actually see in the set here where I've got 3 taps: an original tap, a carbon steel one that's been snapped off, but I haven't broken much off at all. It's actually snapped off just starting the job, really. So that one's been ground shorter. And then that one I showed you previously, which has been snapped off well into the job. And yeah, certainly there's another one, which is obviously a lot shorter than its brothers and sisters. And once again, you're going to get life out of that, and you'll be able to do something with that you can't do with the original taps, you know. You extend the capabilities. So don't throw that stuff out. Just modify it, get your grinder going, put those taps away, and they'll be really, really handy at some stage when you're working on blind holes. The length of the remaining thread generally isn't a problem with a lot of blind holes. A lot of them are fairly shallow. You might get some stud bolts that are fairly long, in which case you would have to buy a proper blind hole tap. But for most project work, hobby work, model making stuff, you'll find that there's be more than enough thread left to actually do the job. And a lot of these taps have got a smaller shank than the actual threading section, so you can actually screw them right up to the holder. This one you can't, because obviously they've made a tap with a thicker shank than the actual threading section. So it can happen, but the good quality taps generally often have a smaller shank, so you can actually go in beyond the depth of the thread itself. It'll vary. So there you have it. You can never have too many taps, and even these cheap sets do the job. And over the years you can see I've snapped off, broken lots of taps, and some of them were salvageable and have been turned into bottoming taps. But you can't salvage every tap, but sometimes you can get enough to make it workable. So there's a little tip for you. I hope you found it interesting. See you next time. Cheers.